and welcome to the Brand Hunch podcast, where we explore ideas and hunches around how marketers are growing great brands. It's a look under the hood at how much is marketing science and how much is built on a hunch. We are doing something a little different today on this episode. Alongside the Brand Hunch, I'm also managing director over at Chello. Today, I'm joined by two of our own, Chello's strategy lead, Tom Dabner, and our executive creative director and co-founder, Tristan Velasco. At Chello, we've just released Operation Brand, our very first brand leadership benchmark report, based on, 1,200 minutes, I think, of candid conversations with senior brand and marketing leaders across 25 organisations. We jump into how they define brand, who owns it, how it gets embedded day to day, and what they're planning over the next 12 months. We've tried to make this as useful and valuable as possible. Their conversation was centred around operationalising brand, so the leaders who are buying in to stand out. What emerged was really interesting, so I've decided to put Tris and Tom on the spot to share the tensions they're seeing, their own perspectives, what makes great brand leadership, whether you're a CMO, brand director, founder, trying to steer a growing business. This one's for you. I hope you get something great from it. Tris and Tom, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hey, Lindsay.
So you've both spent many, probably too many hours interviewing brand and marketing leaders for this report. Tris, for anyone who doesn't know much about Chello, why did you choose to undertake this huge research project, and why now?
We're a brand agency, and we're constantly looking for better ways to actually embed brands with the clients that we work with. Gone are the days where, you were limited to delivering it as a static PDF. And particularly now, as the landscape of marketing has been significantly disrupted, it felt like a good time to actually go understand what is the state that we're needing to deal with and how can we better enable brands across our clients.
I always find it interesting, as an agency, and I put my sort of agency hat on for a sec, we are making a lot of assumptions and, thinking that senior marketers are thinking these things or grappling with these issues, or from one client over here, we think that then should apply to all clients. And I guess what we've done in this case is stopped and actually ask the questions and seek first to listen to understand before sort of jumping in. Tom, why is that important to you personally?
Because you don't know what's inside other people's heads. And for me, I find often the most interesting perspectives are the ones that aren't mine, or at least aren't mine before I've had the information to make that decision, right? And when you go out and ask all of these people their views on something as big as this, you're going to get so many different answers. And so while it was important for us to, I suppose, to do this as a research piece, to then play it back to the industry, it's also a huge amount of learning for us as well.
And Tom, what can people expect to find in it? What kind of ideas did you explore in the research?
There are lots of things in there. I think, though, one thing to highlight is what you won't find is that this is very much the way that we heard what people were saying, as opposed to our own perspective on the matter. So it's a really observational look across a range of businesses to understand how they approach making brands stick within their organizations. Hence the name Operation Brand. It's all about operationalizing brand within these places, as opposed to just the veneer that sort of sits on top. Something that stood out to me and that I thought was really interesting, one of the brands that we spoke to when it comes to adoption told us that their mission was to turn every single one of their 5,000 employees into a brand ambassador, which is really hard, right, when you've got that many people. But I thought the fact that that was their ambition and what they've set out to do really shows how much they believe in the power of getting it right and influences the way that they approach it.
I know that the research has gone out anonymised, and there are a lot of senior marketers we talked to that we sort of wanted the off the record or, a bit more of a chatty conversation around brand application internally rather than it being, on the internet forevermore. Tom, thinking back to all the interviews that you personally undertook, how much does the size of the business play into adoption of brand across the organisation?
You'd think that the larger the organisation, the better they would have their together. But I think often it's the other way around, because businesses are getting bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more departments. You're seeing things pop up, roles pop up that didn't exist 2 years ago, let alone 5 years ago, which is why I think this conversation is so important to be having right now. And I think why we got such good response from the people that we spoke to, because the more fragmented businesses get, because they are growing, the simpler the brand adoption needs to get. Because everyone needs to understand it. They all need to know what their accountabilities are and how they play that role. And so the smaller agencies that have less moving parts are probably the ones to pay attention to and that we can all learn from.
I might build on that. I guess more established businesses understands why it's important to protect or invest in brands because ultimately they're protecting their market share as opposed to growing businesses are needing to steal market share from, existing competitors. As a result, I feel like at least research also shows that they've got a better understanding of the role brand awareness plays and how that starts to shape and influence behavior. But as businesses do get more complex and more roles start to pop up, the complexities naturally arise as a result of that.
I know anecdotally that a few of the senior marketers that the research interviewed rated senior leadership's buy-in to brand as a commercial driver as 10 out of 10. Do either of you have any insights as to why some organisations have adopted brand really well, consistently, and it's driving great commercial results, and why others, not for lack of trying, just don't seem to reach the same heights?
It's one thing to say you believe in it. It's another thing to act on that and actually do the things that you need to do in order to make it work. And I think the businesses that do it really well, the conviction comes from the very, very top and all of those people that sit, whether it's the board, the C-suite, various leadership teams.
That's interesting. So do you think brand can be adopted across the organisation without senior leadership buy-in, so without a CEO or similar's role, or you think that's a mandatory?
It depends how big your business is, right? And what the seats of influence are. But if there's not buy-in from that level, it just doesn't work. And it's why we make it a point whenever we do any kind of strategy work or kicking things off with a new brand to try to get as many people at that level in the room as we can. You don't always get them. And I think it's always harder to affect change or to implement good work when you are just speaking to the one department whose job it is, to make that change happen. You have to have bigger, broader buy-in.
I agree with that. I think ultimately if you don't have alignment up the top, then you're never going to get buy-in at any point. And it's going to be a constant business case that you're needing to have to put forward.
My perspective is there's a bit of a misnomer around a rebrand, and I think senior marketers moving into new marketing roles get a bad rap for sort of wanting to start the job with rebranding X organisation. When do you guys think a rebrand is required versus not? And what is the sort of process or what is the purpose of a rebrand above and beyond the sort of physical changes to what we would say is like the visual brand?
You need to have a clear reason as to why a rebrand needs to be undertaken. So, for example, the existing brand might not reflect the ambition of where the brand needs to go. There's a fundamental shift in the markets or the customer. So you need to sort of, build greater relevance with your new customers. If it's rebrand for the sake of rebranding or, they're starting to get tired or bored of the brand, you're not actually leveraging the existing equity that you've built over that time. When we think about, how do you operationalize brands across the entire business and have shared ownership of brands across various departments, the accountability towards the core of that brand starts to become shared, therefore needs to be greater arguments why rebrand needs to happen in the first place.
I'd say as well, when you look at your brand and you realize that you are not behaving like you anymore, then it's probably time to look at the brand more holistically. When it's a case of, well, this is working, but over here we need to change something, then I think it's more about optimization. And really it's having the maturity to look at the brand through that lens, rather than going, well, something needs to change, therefore rebrand and everything will solve our problems.
So I guess one of the big questions is how do you prove it's working? How do you prove investment in brand and brand as an operating system is working? It's probably a question on every brand or marketing leader's lips. What did the research say, Tris?
I guess there are 4 key themes that sort of emerge from the research. One being brand health still matters. There are a lot of sort of existing and emerging tools that are coming out. Second was reputation tells a deeper story. So really spending a lot of time understanding your customers or even doing sort of third-party interviews to understand the sentiment towards a brand so that they can start to sort of shape the role and impact brands play within their customers. The third being commercial signals are gaining weight. You've got internal analytics. For example, how are your costs of acquisition tracking over a period? And is that reducing or increasing over time? If it's increasing, that means you've got a brand awareness problem or consideration problem. And then lastly, culture as an internal KPI. How does the entire business understand what role they play in delivering brands and how it's actually embedded within an organization? And you can do internal scorecards like employment engagement scores.
Brand has long been considered an intangible asset, but the research uncovered a myriad of tools that brands are using to track their brand health, from old school surveys to modern software platforms. Give me a quick run through of the methods and tools that were mentioned. Did anything come across that was a little less obvious?
Historically, it's been very difficult to measure brands. And, there are a lot of platforms out there that are emerging that allow you to do that in a more accessible way. So, for example, tracksuits, being able to sort of get access to your brand tracking, brand health in a more always-on fashion. They sort of track it on a monthly basis. You've got tools like Canva that's sort of constantly evolving to enable brands across entire organizations, not limiting it to just professionals that can sort of deliver and execute on brand. I think the growth of such platforms again start to help deliver brands organization-wide versus it being sort of limited to one team, which is quite exciting and I think quite empowering for teams as well, especially when you've got dashboards available to you to sort of see where your brand sits on a monthly basis. You can use those metrics at a leadership level or boardroom level to go, this is the impact of the work that we're doing, and actually attribute that to specific campaigns or initiatives that the businesses are rolling out. And hopefully start to build more confidence in brand investments for the long term. And particularly when you're able to sort of, see that conversion rate against the different levels of the funnel over time. It allows you to actually make decisions around where those investment dollars need to go.
Tom, what are some of the sort of issues or things that senior marketers are grappling with? Where are they focusing over the next 12 months?
It's a great question. And really there were sort of 5 themes that came through most of the people that we spoke to. The top one is all about securing investment. So how can I get the money that I need to do the brand work that I know I need to do in order to, to kind of move the needle, and then proving the commercial impact as a result. The second is getting alignment across the organization on the importance of brand. I think while we just talked about it, laddering down from the C-suite, you still need buy-in all the way through the organization. So making sure that anywhere that there are gaps, that the education is done and that you can bring all of the right people on the journey. The third is really focusing on enduring brand platforms and giving equal weight, or at least, balancing the weight between brand efforts and more BAU performance-based marketing, which ultimately is going to drive, that sort of awareness level. So that was another thing people talked about. Being open to trialing things and not just sort of, waiting for the most opportune moment in order to focus more on brand. I think it was a really good quote that someone said was the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And so sitting on when should we, when shouldn't we, usually the best time to do that is right now. And then the last part was all about strengthening their customer experience and loyalty and really looking at all of the channels that consumers sort of validate brand and the ways that brands speak to them. And it's far beyond advertising, and where are the places that we can get people really obsessed about what it is that we're doing. And that comes down to those sort of micro nuances of understanding who the customer really is.
Let's talk about AI and distinctiveness for a second. Leaders see AI as an operational accelerator, but worry about generic, hollow output and eroded trust. Where do you, Tris, personally draw the line between AI as a co-pilot and AI as creative director?
I think my perspective of AI is the quality of the input's going to affect the quality of the output. I think AI has sort of increased the messy middle, or this sort of middle in regards to what's good. The bar of what actually looks good has been raised because, anyone can make anything look good. Therefore, what's actually good and what's actually is going to stand out a lot more. And I think you give AI too much responsibility of what it's going to deliver, then I think that's where you're going to, start to sort of see dilution of the message and getting lost. You really need to sort of lean into at least your ideas, your direction, the way that you start to shape how you use AI and use it to actually start to amplify what you're producing rather than doing it for you.
I guess in the context of distinctiveness too, models are trained on retrospective knowledge, and I guess our job as creatives is to think ahead. Tom, what effect do you think it's going to have on the industry and everyone in it over the next few years? Are you feeling positive?
I am feeling positive on the whole. I will say as well on that previous question, it reminds me of a similar thing when the rise of all of the design blogs that were out there, and all of a sudden everyone had the same reference material to start with, and the same thing happened. You started to see a period where everyone was producing work that looked the same because they were all going to the same inspiration site. And I think AI is another iteration of that. It's just doing it much faster and at greater scale. And so where people will cut through, to Tristan's point, it's the taste sort of calibrator that exists within inside you that can determine what's worth pushing, what's actually good versus just what appears to be good on the surface. And I think that's why I'm excited about it, because I think for creatives, as strategists or writers, whoever, that are using AI, that are still comfortable with doing the difficult version of trying to get to a good output, are going to produce the better work. Because I think for a lot of people, it's all about efficiency. It's about being able to work faster. It's about being able to do more with less time. None of them really talk about doing better work. And so I think those that are still going to push to do better, regardless of what tool they're using, will get the best out of it, and they will be able to do it faster because, of course, it's still going to help you to get to your ideas quicker or help you to produce things at greater scale. And I think we're finding as well the results that we get with AI are far more interesting and more distinctive when we have a perspective to put into the prompt or to put into the workflows that we're building out.
And I think what we're amazing at is connecting dots in regards to, it might be a film you watched when you were 5 years old, or a conversation that you had with your grandma on the weekends, how that then relates to a business problem that you're trying to solve today. When AI is built on a law of averages, it's not going to be able to build those connections. And I think that's the opportunity that we've got to celebrate and start to play a very important role in what we do in the age of AI.
For a CMO listening who's under pressure to AI more, what's one thing that clearly improves how brand is embedded, not just how content's produced?
I would urge any CMO or any marketing leader who has this pressure to basically play back to whoever's asking it them, why are we using AI more and what is it we are hoping to achieve by doing that? Because I think it's the buzzword at the moment, right? Everyone's saying we need to use AI more, but you can use it and you can produce a whole lot of crap that's actually going to do you a disservice and not benefit the brand.
At what cost?
Yeah, exactly. And they're right. Great. You've ticked the brief. You're using more AI. Maybe we've lost a few roles as a result of it. We're making more stuff, but actually it's not building the brand or growing revenue. So I think really it's how can you use AI to
get you closer to the promise?
Yeah. How do you use AI to amplify the good work that you're already doing and help you to do more of it more effectively? I think that's another thing. How do you use AI for better effectiveness as opposed to greater efficiency or, just to produce more for the sake of more? It's about getting better results.
Leaders you've spoken to describe brand as reputation, experience, emotion, a growth lever, and personality. If brand is all of those things, how do you stop it becoming abstract and instead turn it into something that actually guides behavior?
I guess my definition of brands is a brand's a promise, the business is a promise kept. And I think if you sort of think about it from how do you actually practically apply that across an organization? It's not the responsibility of one department. Typically marketing is responsible for communications, and it starts to shift the question into being a decision-making question around, is what I'm doing within my remit, within my role, actually delivering on the promise that we've made as a brand? And that can apply to HR, to sales, to customer experience. And if you sort of understand that and contextualize that within your role, it stops becoming a policing function to more of an enablement function. And I think that's where the real opportunity when it comes to understanding the role of brand within an organization is. There's greater accountability over what role people take.
It's empowering as well, rather than being policing. There's opportunity and growth. The research looks at two schools of formalisation of brand work. You've got tightly locked strategy documents, and then you've got fluid, culturally embedded approaches. You're both creative director, strategy people. Where do you each sit on that spectrum, and what have you seen work best?
Look, truthfully, I don't think that there's always a right or wrong way to formalise brand and strategy. There are different ways that work for different organisations, which is why I think we've heard, both sides of that fence in this research. I think what matters most is how you bring the people on the journey that need to execute against that brand or need to show up. And as Tristan just pointed out before, that's really everyone in the organization to varying degrees, right? And as long as you understand your responsibility or what your accountabilities are, and you have the tools to do that, it should work. For me, I like breaking rules. There's a bit more fun in that, but I think in order to break them, you have to have understood where they've come from in the first place. And so again, that the more people can be on the journey to how you got there, the more confidence and comfort they have in knowing where they can sort of flex and where they should sort of hold true.
I think building that. I mean, I'm in agreement with you in regards to breaking rules, and I think once you've sort of got the foundations in place, and it's less about have I done the right piece? Can someone check my work? To where can this brand grow? How can I sort of innovate, experiments with the brands? I think that sort of leads you into more interesting and creative ways for the brand to show up. I think particularly with function of the tools we have been limited to in the past, it's been quite static. It's been quite locked. I think in this age of AI, it's just allowed us to be a lot more dynamic in how we can check, enable, empower teams to be able to sort of maintain brands and brand consistency without actually having to be over every decision, every piece of content that's being executed out there. So I think we're entering a really interesting age and where brands growth can come from.
Tris, you mentioned before that brand should be accessible by everyone. If brand truly is an operating system, who then should own it?
I think going back to the business is your promise kept, it should be shared ownership. I think whilst you've got marketing teams as an ambassador of the brands to help empower, enable the broader business, I think if, like any sort of operating system, you should be able to swap out the parts for it to still be able to function. And then I think that's a big shift in, I think, what an operating system is versus it being the sole responsibility of one department.
On that note, I know you've done a lot of work with various boards and, governing the brand strategy in which the organisation then adopts. How have you managed to bring board members, maybe even sceptical people, on board with brand as an operating system and really believing the work that you land on?
Allowing them, I mean, at any sort of, not just boards, but the leadership level, allowing them to be part of the journey. Once they sort of see, the work, the process, the thinking that goes behind brands, and start to shift that mindset from it just being the veneer or the communications layer to it actually being decision-making process, it's incredible to sort of see that mindset shift happen in real time. We've got an existing chair that's sort of acting as CEO at the moment, and he's become the most significant brand advocates across the organization. That not only is he asking the questions from his senior team in regards to how we're going to do this, but he's actually looking at ways in which how we're going to make sure that we're going to enable this for the long term culturally across the organization, which is such an exciting shift, particularly from, when they sort of start the conversation.
Yeah, before and after.
Not knowing anything about brand to them being a true brand ambassador.
What are some practical ways you've seen brand made accessible at scale beyond guidelines and slide decks?
I think ultimately it's allowing different leaders within different departments be part of the branding process. Once they sort of align on what that promise is, then you sort of develop ways in which they can start to contextualize that within their teams. Therefore, you're sort of enabling the role of brands start to filter through a departmental level, and then they can start to develop ideas or more practical ways in how it might sort of apply to their day-to-day.
The data shows that 86% of people you spoke to said that their senior leadership is relatively aligned on brand as a commercial driver. But brand is still the first budget cut when times get tough. What is going on there?
Shall I go? It feels like the real issue behind it, and this is what we heard speaking to all of these various leaders, isn't so much that there is a lack of belief in brand. That's definitely there. But I think as businesses get more and more complex and there are more and more moving parts and various extra departments that didn't exist 20 years ago that all play into the story, there are just more things that leadership level have to pay attention to, more things that fight for their attention. And quite frankly, a lot of these feel more immediate. And whereas a brand is always been a long-term play and something that you need to put time and energy in over time to see the reward, the truth of it is things like sales conversions or performance metrics that are, results the day after you do something are what people are looking at. And so they believe in brand. They totally buy into all of the research and the data and the stories and the success stories. But when it comes to making a decision, if I can't see it tomorrow, it's really difficult for them to double down on.
I might just add on that. I think businesses are essentially measured on quarters, being able to sort of hit those quarterly metrics. And as you just pointed out, Tom, brand's built over a longer period. And the impact of brand starts to sort of build pipeline, improve price sensitivity, and then reduce cost of acquisition. But if you're not actually allowing enough investment to go into brands because you've got those quarterly targets to hit, then that's where the sort of tension exists. And I think that's I guess, a complex struggle that a lot of marketing leaders are having to balance.
I'd say on the whole, we're seeing across the board that marketing leaders have gone from being known as the colouring in department to being on the hook for revenue, P&L, and even shaping product and culture. How do you think that's changing the skills and mindset required of senior marketers and brand leaders into the future?
To be honest, I think the role of the CMO or marketing director has actually diluted over time. And it's interesting that that's the definition that's been given. Ultimately, if you go back to the 4 Ps, they were responsible for business growth. And I think if you sort of start to think about, okay, so what does growth actually look like and what responsibility that takes? It's actually all of those things that you've pointed out. I think the challenge is, and I think we were discussing this earlier, Tom, was the fact that the remit has been so fragmented. What they're actually responsible for, the channels they're needing to manage has become so complex so that, ultimately you just don't have the time, the headspace, or the resources to be able to think, step back and think more strategically across the broader business.
Do you think too much is being asked of one function?
100%. And I think particularly as, to your point, businesses are starting to get more complex, I think you're starting to get more silos in how the departments actually operate, which is not, the fault of the marketing team or the marketers, but it's just evolution of the business landscape. And I guess that's why it sort of goes back down to, the point around it needs to be a shared ownership. Like once you've got a clear understanding of how the role and responsibility of brand starts to play across the various departments, then hopefully we'll start to see a bit more relief over the remit of marketing teams.
Let's focus back on the report. Tom, what were some of the findings that you thought were quite interesting?
What did I find interesting? While each of the respondents had different approaches or different ways of looking at brand, what I really enjoyed seeing coming through was how aligned everybody was on how operationalizing brand needs to change or needs to happen in order to get better results, in order to bring more of the organization into the fold and be accountable for how they deliver it. Some of them had a lot more, had further to go than others, but the intent was there, right? Which I think shows that there's a maturity and there's a desire from all of these people that are in positions of influence to make those changes. And really the barrier for them is that broader buy-in, right? It's trying to affect these changes within inside an organization that is ready to do that.
Tom, has your own definition of brand changed through undertaking this work, and has it changed over the years?
For me, I don't think there is a single definition of brand. The way that I think about it changes very regularly because the world that we operate in and the world that brands operate in is changing all the time. You've got cultural impacts, you've got market shifts, you've got things that are out of your control. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, what's going to get in the way of success? And he said, events. So there's things that you can't control are the things that are going to change. And because of that, you have to be willing to adapt the way that you approach, the way that you do things.
If there are any CEOs listening who need to be convinced that brand should be treated as an operating system, what would each of you say to them? Maximum 30 seconds each.
Think of your brand as something that is living and evolving all the time, right? Because they don't stand still, because the culture and the world around you doesn't stand still, the way that you implement that brand needs to follow suit. And so the idea of treating your brand like an operating system is that it's going to evolve over time. So when a certain event happens or we release a new product or we decide to go a different direction, you evolve the brand to match that. And you go from, version 1 to version 1.2, for example.
And Tris, 30 seconds.
If you look at some recent examples of how businesses have used brand as a promise and they've kept that promise through the business, treating it as operating system actually guides decisions. So for example, Canva purchased Affinity for $380 million and decided to give it for free. The business grew from $2 billion to $3.5 billion in 2 years. That's just one example, but it shifts the question from should we invest in brands versus does it stay as part of the responsibility of one team?
I think what you're both talking about, in summary, or my take anyway, is this idea of having conviction. And instead of brand being this sort of nebulous, everything goes, and yeah, we could stand for that given this recent event or this change in circumstance, Sounds to me like what you're both talking about is having really core, deep brand obligations almost to your customers and to your people, things that you stand for no matter the circumstance, and how you choose to turn up might change, but who you are at your core stays the same.
Yeah. And I think to add to that as well, the whole purpose of this means that if your team changes, right, there's the classic cliche that the marketing director comes in and they last somewhere 2 to 5 years and they want to bring in their vision and influence change. But often that change is at odds to stuff that's been built over years and years and years. And because the way it's documented is static, it's easy for it to get, lost in a folder somewhere or in a drawer if you're, 20 years ago. And so again, running it like this means that no matter what changes, the things that need to stay the same or the bits that are at your core remain there and can be carried through.
Finally, this podcast is all about having a hunch. Tell me one hunch that you have backed in your career and how it's worked out.
That it's going to be okay in the end. And it usually is. Nice.
Tris?
Usually it's backing your first idea and knowing that it is the right answer, because quite often it is. And, you might sort of go around in circles to validate it, but it's typically the winning one.
Thank you. That is all from us. I'll leave a link to the report for you to dive into in the episode notes, or you can simply Google Chello, Chello, brand report to find it on the go.